Before I get into today's episode, let me tell you about the Obscure History merch store. If you go to obscurehistorypod.com or follow the link in the show notes, you can find some really cool Obscure History merch. I recently added some new designs to the store, and also for a limited time, everything is 20% off. T-shirts, hoodies, backpacks, skateboards, everything. And as always, a portion of every sale will go to charity. This time around, it's the American Red Cross, who do amazing work for families all across the United States. So to help out a good cause and show your support for the show, head over to obscurehistorypod.com or follow the link in the show notes to buy some fun Obscure History merch today. Last week we uncovered one of the strangest Christmas miracles. A tiny infant locked inside a leather hat box, left on the side of a highway on Christmas Eve in the Arizona desert. We looked deep into the unusual actions of the young couple that found the baby, and then, just like the story of the Hatbox Baby, the episode went cold. However, today we dig even deeper into this bizarre Christmas miracle. My name is Josh, and this is Obscure History. In July of 1986, the Pinal County Superior Court received a strange motion. The request? To unseal the adoption records in a 55-year-old case. The movant? An 83-year-old woman named Faith Morrow. In her plea to the courts, she explained that she had been bearing a secret for over half a century from one of the people she loved the most, and she wanted to set the record straight. She told the courts about an incident 2 years prior, in 1984, while she was undergoing treatment for breast cancer, where the radiation had burned the lining of her heart. She nearly died. Since that incident, she had also fallen and broken a hip, and undergone hip replacement surgery. She felt the hand of death clenching around her. She had seen the world spin madly for nearly a century, and before it was her turn to leave this mortal coil, she needed to get the secret off her chest. In her motion, she explained her story. Following yet another miscarriage, I was beginning to think I would never have a baby of my own. When I heard the news on the radio Christmas morning, we turned off the oven on the turkey and drove right to Mesa to see the baby. You should have seen her. So perfect. So perfectly adorable. We requested to adopt her. I was told they had 200 applications. According to Morrow, even though there were 200 applications, only 2 of the families showed up to the adoption hearing. Inclement weather made it difficult for most of the petitioners to make it back to Mesa. As she sat with her husband, Henry Stieg, the other family presented their case to the judge. According to Morrow, the woman didn't say anything, but the man said, "We have adopted one daughter, and I'll say right here she's been raised in fear of the Lord, and I don't believe in sparing the rod and spoiling the child. I prayed, dear God, don't let that man have my baby." Her prayers were answered when Judge Green awarded custody of the Hatbox Baby to Morrow and her husband, on the condition that the fate of the Hatbox Baby, alias Miracle Marian, alias Jane Doe, remained secret. She needed a fresh start. All parties agreed and parted ways, and that condition was met for 55 years. But as Faith Morrow felt her time on this planet slipping away, she petitioned to unseal the adoption records. Her petition was granted, and she set about the daunting task of breaking the news to her daughter. In 1988, the Hatbox Baby went to the press in Mesa to identify herself and seek answers. December 26, 1988, Mesa, Arizona. It wasn't until more than half a century later that a retired aerospace worker learned that she was the Hatbox Baby, a newborn found in a hatbox in the Arizona desert on Christmas Eve 1931. Everybody in my family knew the story except me, said Sharon Elliott, who at age 57 still has the same red hair and blue eyes that won so many hearts in 1931 when the story hit newspapers. My mother didn't want me to find out. It was such a shock after all these years, I couldn't believe that during all that time it had been kept from me, she said in an interview published Sunday in the Mesa Tribune. She explained, my daughter and son-in-law were being transferred to Mesa, and my mother was afraid that somehow I would find out, that somebody would say something and I would get hurt. It was a big story in those days, and for years papers wrote about it every Christmas, wondering whatever happened to that little baby. When she told me, I cried. She was the only mother I ever knew, the only one I ever wanted, but now that she's gone, I'd like to find out more. Unfortunately for Sharon, not many answers presented themselves immediately. However, the public at least had some resolution to the story. The Hatbox Baby was adopted, moved to California, worked in the aerospace industry, and retired, and serendipitously returned to Mesa. Case closed, right? Not even close. What had her life been like for 55 years between leaving Mesa as an infant and returning again as a retiree? Where had she come from in the first place? Who were these people that dropped their entire life on Christmas Day to drive across the state and claim an infant they had only seen once? With every answer came a dozen more questions. Sharon's adopted mother, Faith Morrow, was a curious woman with a penchant for using aliases. Her early life was turbulent. She was born Faith Lillian Amelia Soderstrom in Minnesota in 1903, the youngest child of a Swedish-born preacher. By age 7, she had moved to New Mexico. By 16, she was living in a boarding house in Los Angeles with her mother, who worked as a housekeeper. By 17, she was living in Prescott, Arizona with her sister and her brother-in-law, a World War I veteran being treated for injuries at Fort Whipple. Shortly after moving to Prescott, Faith began working at the fort as a typist. It was here that she met her first husband, Sigmund Ingersoll. However, the marriage was short-lived. Less than 3 years after tying the knot, Faith filed for divorce. Her reason? She alleged that Sigmund lacked the ability to support her financially and that he did not want children, a point upon which they hotly disagreed. Sigmund didn't even show up to the hearing. The divorce was granted and Faith Ingersoll disappeared. However, shortly after the divorce, a woman named Fanny Ingersoll moved to Phoenix and began working as a typist at the Veterans Bureau. That very same year, Fanny changed her name back to Faith and married an up-and-coming grocer named Henry Stieg. Stieg came from dirt. He was born in Ohio to a family of meager farmers and laborers. His parents divorced when he was young, and he lived with his mother, who sold his labor to a neighboring farm. Henry Stieg only completed school to the 6th grade. Though his origin was difficult and his outlook gloomy, he kept his head up and eyes forward. Though he was born at a severe disadvantage, he always looked for ways to improve his standing in life. By his teenage years, he was selling fruits and vegetables at his own fruit stand, and was making enough money that he was able to print a weekly advertisement in the local papers to promote his business. By 19, Stieg was married with children, but when business called him to Arizona, his wife decided to stay in Ohio. According to Stieg, Arizona was too hot for her, but it's unclear exactly what caused their divorce. About a year after their separation, Henry met Faith, who was likely going by Fanny Ingersoll, and they fell in love. They married in 1928, and for 4 years things seemed to be going great, except for one small problem. They couldn't have children. They were the picture of success when they appeared at the adoption hearing for the Hatbox Baby in 1931. Henry was making about $45 per week, which translates to about $822 per week in today's currency. In the Depression, this was a very respectable salary. He also reported at the hearing that they lived in a house on 2.5 acres on McDowell Road, just east of the city limits. They said that the house and property were valued at $5,500 and they only owed $1,000 on it. And he also testified that he owned 600 shares of the A.J. Bayless grocery chain, which he was an executive of. It's no wonder that the judge awarded them custody of the baby. They were the ideal couple. Well off, especially in the Depression, motivated, happy, and childless. They happily accepted the baby and named her Sharon Mary Elizabeth Steig, and finally began living their dream as a complete family. However, the Steigs would not remain the picture of the perfect family for long. Just 7 months after they adopted baby Sharon, Henry Steig filed for divorce. His wife had already moved back to Prescott at the time. In his petition, Henry accused Faith of cruel treatment, saying that for more than a year she constantly and without reason found fault with and quarreled with him both in private and before his friends and acquaintances. According to Henry, she mocked his manner of speech and the lack of education, causing him constant discomfort, annoyance, and mental pain and anguish. Finally, Henry claimed that Faith consistently disturbed his peace of mind and the enjoyment of his home by continually urging and insisting that he quit his job and move to California. The divorce was granted, and the three parted ways. Faith with the baby, the car, and the sewing machine, Henry with his dignity. He would go on to be a prominent Phoenix businessman, owning multiple grocery stores, restaurants, and bars, and Faith would go on to marry again. After the divorce, she returned to Fort Whipple for employment. It was in this bout of employment that she met a man named Charles Cook, a widower with a young son named Jack. The two were married about a year and a half after her divorce from Henry. The two were married for less than a year when Cook died, leaving Faith, baby Sharon, and young Jack Cook on their own. Records from the late 1930s show that Faith and Sharon were living in a home owned by a music teacher and her brother named Vera and Arthur Morrow. In 1939, Arthur Morrow married a woman named Esther Cook, who strangely had a daughter named Sharon, and the exact same birth date as Faith Cook, who was previously Faith Steig, who was previously Fanny Ingersoll, who was previously Faith Ingersoll, who was born Faith Lillian Amelia Soderstrom. Mysteriously, a year later, Faith Cook is listed in the 1940 census as a widow living in Los Angeles with her children, Jack Cook and Sharon Steig, along with her acquaintances Vera and Arthur Morrow. Arthur Morrow's World War II draft registration card lists him as working for Air Research, an aerospace company in Inglewood, California, where he spent the rest of his career helping raise Sharon and Jack. He would give Sharon away at her wedding. Arthur Morrow was the only father that Sharon ever knew. Her mother never told her about the other marriages. She never knew their names or their stories. Her mother had many odd tendencies. Why would she never feel the need to tell Sharon about her previous marriages, or where she came from, or the fact that she was the subject of a widely publicized mystery? Why did she change her name so many times, seemingly unnecessarily? What was she hiding? Unfortunately, we will likely never know. Faith Morrow died only a few months after telling Sharon that she was indeed the Hatbox Baby, and she never did elaborate on the rest of her past. Though this strand did not lead to any final resolution, the hard work of journalist John DeElla, private investigator Alice Simon, and many others eventually uncovered a tangled web of intrigue and conspiracy. And we'll get back to untangling that mess in about 90 seconds, but for now, we need to pay the bills. So hang tight, we'll be right back. At first, it seemed as if Sharon would never find closure. The leads were few and always ended with a solid brick wall, including a possible connection to an oil tycoon's daughter who may have palled around with George H.W. Bush in her younger days. DeElla continued his diligent work, though, and in October of 2016, he was contacted by a woman named Glenda Pauling, who had some tantalizing information and a possible new lead. When she contacted Deella, she wrote, "Without getting into a lot of detail at this point, there was a circumstance in our family where a baby, my parents' firstborn, was placed in a pretty box and was promptly removed from the house. This happened in the early 1930s in Silver City, New Mexico." In a separate account, Poling describes the birth of the sister that she never knew. It was the early 1930s, in the midst of the Great Depression. The economy felt like a mallet driving nails into the coffins of most Americans. The future was but a bleak silhouette, unclear and ethereal. For parents at this time, giving birth was often bittersweet. Parents naturally wanted to see their newborn, wanted to love it, and prayed for its health, but somewhere deep down they worried about providing for it. How could parents expect to properly care for an infant if they could not properly care for themselves? Perhaps Glenda Poling's mother, Annie Louise Holt Fullstone, was feeling this mixture of joy and dread as she labored in a New Mexico room. It was her first baby. She was in her early 20s, and the world around her looked as if it were collapsing. She labored, grinded her teeth through the unbearable pain of birth, and then, miraculously, she ushered her baby into the world, in the presence of her husband, John Fullstone, her doctor, known only as Mr. Williams, her mother-in-law, who was known as Leola Jesmore, and her mother-in-law's friend, whose name has been lost to time. This moment of elation was abruptly shattered. Before even seeing her baby, Annie heard the most painful words a mother can hear. The baby didn't survive. And that was the story, for a while. The Fullstone family secret was revealed to Glenda Poling and her sister Lorraine Gaines in 1978. The baby hadn't died at birth. It had been taken by their grandmother Leola Jesmore, placed in a pasteboard hat box, and was removed from the hospital for an unknown reason. Their mother insisted that the baby had died and was taken by Jesmore to be buried in Silver City. So the two women went to Silver City. There was no record of the baby being buried there. They eventually uncovered a birth certificate which clearly stated that the baby had been born and was alive. They also uncovered a death certificate. The only problem is that the death certificate was issued 7 months before the birth certificate. Why would they have issued a death certificate only 3 months into the pregnancy? What could their motives have been, and who would have done such a thing? The women turned their attention to the people who'd been in the room at the birth of baby Fullstone, and they found some very curious things. Their grandmother Leola Jesmore had a long and bizarre track record. Glenda Poling told the Las Cruces Sun-News, "In doing our search, we felt like we had to examine the players in the room. And as we explored who the players were, the common denominator was our grandmother. She was very wicked and had been imprisoned for several things in her lifetime, usually including the acquisition of other people's children." Upon learning this new information, journalist John Deella was intrigued, but skeptical. Mesa was about a day's drive away, but why would this woman steal her own granddaughter, drive her a day away, and abandon her in the desert? There wasn't a clear motive. It would make sense if she had taken the baby and sold it on the black market, but clearly, that's not what had happened if Sharon was really the Fullstone baby. His skepticism was shaken when Glenda Poling sent him a photograph of her grandmother. She looked just like Sharon Elliott. John Deella showed a side-by-side comparison of Leola Jesmore and Sharon Elliott to his colleagues, and they asked, if they were the same woman. Filled with new hope, he asked Sharon to take a DNA test as well as Glenda Poling. If they were indeed long-lost sisters, their DNA would reveal the truth. I mean, it had to be, right? Baby Fullstone was taken from her mother under extremely shady circumstances. In a hat box, by a woman known for kidnapping and forgery. About a day's drive away from where Sharon had been found in 1931. Everything lined up so perfectly. Except for the DNA test. The test reported that conclusively, Sharon was not Glenda's long-lost sister. In fact, they were not related at all. More years would tick by until John DeElla and his team would get another lead and finally crack the case wide open. And it is honestly even more bizarre and convoluted than you might be imagining. But that is a story for another week. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I seriously appreciate you all so much. I got so much great feedback from the first part of this series that it made me really excited to get this second episode out. I believe it will be a 3-part series. I don't think I've got quite enough material to make it 4. However, we'll see how things go. I think there will probably be 3 parts and then an extra long Thursday footnotes because there are a lot of things that I'm having to leave out. John DeElla's article, his series for the azsun.com is unbelievable. It's a 10-chapter novel that he put out, and it is seriously so impressive. I'm blown away by his work. Please go check it out. I will link to it again in the show notes. But honestly, maybe wait until next week to go check it out if you don't want spoilers. But it really is incredible. Also, as always, this show is brought to you in part by Earbuds Podcast Collective and Indie Drop-In Network. Ariel and Greg are 2 of the most awesome people in the podcast space. The fact that this show continues to get better each week is largely due to those 2 people. They have given me so much great advice on how to tweak the show to be an even better experience for the listener, and I cannot ever thank them enough. If you like this episode, share it with your friends, post it on social media, leave a rating or review. Spotify now allows you to leave reviews or ratings, one of the 2. I usually use Apple Podcasts, but leave a review, leave a rating, share it on your social media. As always, this is a team of 1. I see everything, so if you share an episode of the show and tag me in it, I will definitely reply. But anyways, guys, I seriously am blown away. We, I think, have officially passed 400,000 total downloads, and, it's beyond my wildest dreams that this has all happened. So thank you. This is all very surreal. 2021 has been rough for a lot of people, for most people, maybe. But because of this show and some amazing developments in my personal life, which I don't usually talk about on here, 2021 has turned out to be great for me personally. And I won't lord it over you because I know that 2021's been really bad for a lot of people. So I will refrain from gloating that I had a good year for now. Maybe in the future, when all of the anxiety and stress is far away, I can talk about how awesome of a year this has been for me. But thank you. You're a large part of that. You're the best. I've got to go. I've got a movie to go watch. I'll see you next week with part 3 of The Hatbox Baby.